Today, we are diving into a story about the world's very first sporting superstars, the absolutely massive betting industry that grew up around them, and a case of mistaken identity that's had historians scratching their heads for over 100 years. Let's get into it. Just try to picture it. Seriously, this isn't some modern football stadium. We're talking about the Circus Maximus in ancient Rome. This is the sound of an entire city, totally captivated by a single, high-stakes, ridiculously dangerous sporting event. You know, long before you could bet on games with an app on your phone, this was the absolute epicenter of organized gambling. Chariot racing. It wasn't just a sport, it was a whole economic engine, and it was fueled by enormous wagers and the roar of that crowd. Okay, so first up, let's talk about the venue itself. The Circus Maximus wasn't just some racetrack. You gotta understand, this was the blueprint for modern sports entertainment as we know it. Think about that number for a second. 250,000 people. I mean, that's more than 3 times the size of the biggest NFL stadium today. The scale was it's hard to even wrap your head around. And every single person there was ready for a show. And yeah, most of them were there to place a bet. And look, this was no back alley operation. Betting was public, it was organized, it was a huge part of the whole experience. It was all run by professional bookmakers called the Argentari. They set up this huge, bustling marketplace right there, where you could literally win or lose a fortune on a single race. The Romans basically invented the sportsbook. All right, so now let's get into the system that fueled this whole frenzy. And this is going to feel very, very familiar to any modern sports fan. We're talking about professional racing teams. These were called the factiones. There were 4 big ones, each with its own color, its own stables, and its own incredibly loyal fan base. You were either a red, a white, a blue, or a green, and that was it. Your loyalty was absolute. The rivalries were intense, they were tribal, and yeah, they could definitely get violent. What's just so wild is how perfectly this system maps onto our world today. Fan loyalty, team colors, bitter rivalries. This is the direct ancestor of the NFL, the Premier League, you name it. In this massive, sprawling empire, supporting your faction gave you an identity, a tribe. So when you cheer for your team, you're basically taking part in a tradition that's over 2,000 years old. Okay, so the teams were the foundation, right? But the whole show was built on the skill, the guts, and the celebrity of individual athletes. So who were these guys who are risking their lives out there on the sand? Now we get to the superstars themselves, the charioteers. These guys were walking contradictions. They were celebrated heroes who often came from the absolute lowest rungs of Roman society. A lot of them were slaves or former slaves. Legally, they were in a state of infamia, which means public disgrace, the same status as actors and gladiators. But on the track, they could win wealth you can't even imagine, and a level of fame that could rival emperors. Just think about that tension for a second. You're legally a nobody, a disgrace, yet there are statues of you being put up all over the city. They were outcasts and icons, all at the same time. And their stats, they are just staggering. Take a guy like Spartacus. He racked up over 2,000 wins before he died at just 27 years old. The poet Martial even wrote that the fate who measures out life must have thought he was an old man just from counting all his victory wreaths. Or Christens, who started his pro racing career at 13. These weren't just athletes, they were absolute legends. But this is where the story takes a sharp turn into mystery. Even though we read about their statues being everywhere, today we have fewer than 20 confirmed portraits of them. That's it. For all their fame, their faces are almost completely lost to time. Which brings us to one single, very tantalizing artifact. For more than a century, the art world thought it had this one priceless exception, a portrait that seemed to finally give us the face of one of these young superstars. This is it. A marble head sitting in a museum in Rome. For decades, it was labeled and displayed as the Fanciullo Auriga, which just means boy charioteer. Everyone thought this was our one clear window into the world of these ancient heroes. So it was found back in 1880, and pretty much right away, people said, hey, with that cap and that intense look, this has to be a charioteer. And that story stuck. It was in all the books, all the catalogs, for 100 years. But then, as historians started to look a little closer, some serious doubts started creeping in. That whole story, the one that everyone had accepted for a century, it just started to fall apart. The face that was supposed to be the face of Roman victory, well, it might belong to someone else entirely. So what happened? How did everyone get it so wrong? Well, the case against the boy charioteer is a really cool piece of historical detective work. The very first clue is the headgear. Okay, look on the left. You can see what a real charioteer's helmet looked like from a carving on a sarcophagus. See how it's thick, protective, it's got a brim? Now look at the cap on our mystery head on the right. It's soft, it's tight-fitting, it looks way more like a cloth or leather skull cap. The thing would offer basically zero protection in a crash. And this gets to a really crucial point from historian Sinclair Bell. When wealthy Romans paid for a formal portrait, they wanted to show off their hair. Their hairstyle was a huge deal. It was a sign of status, fashion, and identity. You wouldn't cover all that up with a clunky helmet. This slide just nails the point home. On the left, that's a confirmed portrait of a charioteer. See? No helmet, just a very specific styled hairdo. And on the right, that's another head that was misidentified for years. That cap he's wearing, it's not for racing. It's actually the mark of a specific type of Roman priest. So now you can kind of see how the mistake happened, right? It was just a chain of bad assumptions. First, there's our modern idea that an athlete would be shown in their gear. Second, mistaking that soft cap for a protective helmet. Third, you look at his face and project this idea of competitive spirit onto it. And finally, you create this great story. A young, foreign boy racer just like Crescent's. That makes all the pieces seem to fit perfectly. So we've pretty much debunked the old story. But that just leaves us with an even bigger question. If this isn't the face of a boy charioteer, one of the lost superstars of the Circus Maximus, then who is he? The investigation is still open, and it's a great reminder that history is never really settled.